Well, welcome back into the studio for another Technique Tuesday, and officially our last Technique Tuesday of 2024. This time I'm going to do something I've done before, not necessarily in a Technique Tuesday, but we are going to make some paper beads. These are paper beads that I've made in the past. They are paper beads are beads that you just roll up onto. I've seen them made with a really large hole the size of a pencil, or I like to use skewers. This one's a little bit larger than this one, but I like to use skewers because I can prop them up while they dry and just leave them on here. But we're going to kind of kick these up a notch and take them up. We're going to make them more than just paper beads. We are going to take them a step further. So that's where what we're doing today in Technique Tuesday. I did want to talk a little bit about papers. So, not to make you dizzy or anything, I'm going to bring you back out. Put these to the side. And you literally can, well, close to literally, make anything into a paper bead. So basically you want to stick with paper that is not super thin. I suppose you could use really thin stuff as well, because you're going to layer it up. You can see the layers here. You don't want your paper too thick is what I'm getting at. So like this is a sewing pattern instruction page. You can use coffee dyed copy paper. You can use wrapping paper that's thin. You can do scrapbooking paper as long as it's not cardstock. This is about as thick as I would like to use. This is printables that have been printed onto just copy paper that I have as scrap left over for something. This is also a free printable from the Art Joy is Sharing, which is a Facebook group called Journey Backgrounds. Or you can even get online, like these are both freebies that were given out that are free from HG Designs. I will of course list them down below. She has one of these that is squared. So if you do a square, it's going to be less dimensional than these. So hopefully you can see how it tapers up when you use an angle. You go from an angle, almost like a triangle. Hers started at a pretty severe point and then kind of angled down. So when I'm cutting mine, I like to cut them like I did here, where it's a very fine tip and it just angles the whole way. And then you get this drop going down. So it gives it some real dimension, which is fun. These were angled, but not as solid of a points here. So as we start cutting, I'm going to use all of these, make at least one out of all these different papers so you can see. And once we get the paper beads made, we're going to then take this a step further. In terms of glues, I like to use either a matte medium gel or even a PVA. Matte medium gel is a little thick, but you can thin it down. Or you can use a PVA. The nice thing about the PVA, it does have that archival. It does dry clear just like the matte medium does, and that's really nice. You could also use a fluid medium, because I will need to also thin this down a hair as well. You can also use Powertex. The nice thing about using Powertex Universal Medium is it's going to make them stiffer. As you get a larger hole in here that you've used when you've created them, they get kind of squishy. And sometimes that can be a hindrance. So the nice thing is if you use universal medium, it's a hardener, and these will be stiffer. Now these that have a real small hole are not going anywhere. But I have found that I can't string just anything through these. It has to be a thread or a 2-ply DMC floss, but the 6-ply DMC floss won't work. Any cording will not work in these. That's what I've run into. So you can use universal medium. It is a nice substitute. And we're going to use a variety of these today so that you can see how each of them works and what challenges you're going to run into when making your beads. So the first thing we're going to do is start to cut down our sheets. So I like to start off with my cutter and then transfer over to scissors for the taper. So basically I'm going to cut out of these papers some strips, and I like to have my beads a little bit larger, so I'm going to go with 3/4 of an inch. You make your own decisions on what size you want yours. So this is going to be the length of the bead. This length right here. So you can see these were probably started at 3/4. They've gotten a little wider. And this was probably at 3/4 as well. It's a standard that I like to use. So I'm actually going to cut off this edge to start with because I don't want this torn edge. But that might be cool too. But I might tear the edge after I've already made my widths. So 3/4 of an inch is what I'm starting off with. Ooch. So I'm going to cut the rest of these out in that same dimension and put them to the side. Alright, so I've got them cut out, and now I'm going to cut them down into a taper. On this one, I'm going to leave this one square like it is. It has a slight taper. And I'm going to leave this one pointy like it is, and I'm going to taper this one. Well, I'll leave both of these pointy like they are, and then you'll see on here how I taper them. I like to use my long shears, and I just simply come in and just follow that white edge, cutting off all the white. So for these, I am just going to start part way up. I'm going to give myself a base of the squared off part because that's where we're going to start wrapping. And then I'm going to come up and just angle this into a point. And then I'm going to come from this end and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to square this tip off a little bit on this one and angle it up like that. So on this one, I'm going to start and I'm going to make my angle a little bit more severe to a point. So I'm shooting for almost the center, just a hair shy of center. And then do that same thing coming down, and at the same place I ended for the square is where I will end that taper and have more of a point. And I'm going to do that for all of these. They don't have to be perfect. I have a little nubbies on this. This is a heavier cardstock, and apparently I need to change the blade in my cutter. There's so much room in these to fudge. You have fudge room, so it doesn't, you really won't be able to see it. Like this one still has masking tape or Scotch tape on it from it being used for, it was wrapping paper from a gift. You won't even see it. Now I'm going to switch this up and make, this is my wide end is green, so this one I'm going to make so my wide end is pink. I'm going to leave one of these square, this is one of the square ones, and I'm going to make the tip more square on this one just because it's shorter. It's a little wonky at the base, but we won't really even see that. And these can be used too. They'll just be tiny little beads. Let's pull one off to the side to use. Maybe we'll pull two off a side to make tiny beads. Okay. Our next step is to set up our drying station. Alright, so I like to use an egg carton to hold my skewer. I just have a hole in the end and I run it through, and then I can lift it up, drag the bead down to dry. The one thing you want to do with your skewer is you want to make it so that these don't stick to it. So I like to use Dorlands wax. You can use beeswax, you can use pieces of candle, but I just take a little bit of the Dorlands Wax Medium, which is kind of expensive, so even just using a candle and rubbing it on here would be beneficial. And I just go down the whole line of my skewer and put a coat on here. These skewers you can find at the grocery store. They're very inexpensive. I think I paid $1.99 for 20 of them, 25 of them. They're very inexpensive. They may have them at the dollar stores as well. And then I'm just gonna run it through like that. So that's where I'm gonna get started with my drying station. Then the next step is to get our glues ready. So I'm going to start off with fluid medium. I'm almost out. I'm trying to get this empty so I can clean out my bottle and then refill it. This is golden fluid matte medium. So I'm going to do the first one using the fluid matte medium, and I'm just going to put this onto my table, and I'll probably have to reload that. And I'm just going to load my paper up with as much as I can and start off on my skewer and start winding. It's hard to get started at first, but once you get started, then it's going to be easier and faster. So now you're going to come in and apply the glue directly from the bottle. And you're just going to use a tab a little bit. And roll. Glued it to the thing. Alright, fine. And roll. And you kind of want to try and stick to center. And I've gotten off skew, so I kind of re-pull it back, like unravel, and then come back and try and get my straight part centered again. And wrap, trying to stay center, because that way our high peak area will be right in the center of the bead. If you don't want that high peak center right in center of the bead, then don't worry about having it centered as you go. And you can really see how fast this can go. So I've run out of glue, so I'm going to add a little bit more. And wrap. Now I've got a lot on my fingers here because I do want to apply that glue to the outside. It's almost like sealing it. Any loose edges, it's going to help it to keep it in that bead shape. Now this is a vintage sewing pattern. It soaks up a lot of glue, and that's been my experience with vintage papers. And then I'm going to just move it down to the end. And then I'm going to come in with my next one. I'm going to apply some glue to the paper. Oops, wrong side, Nina. Run my paper through the glue for that first little part there to the printed side. And then I'm going to fold it upon itself, keeping it as centered as possible. I'm getting off center. I'm going to come over to my left, over to this side a little bit, and get recentered. Some of that's drying a bit. I don't like to go too far out. So that tip wasn't completely centered, so you can see what happens when you get off center. It's closer to this end than this end. But it gives it character. So I'll go over it with more glue. And move it down. Okay, I'm going to show you, this is a short square one. I'm getting off center here. There we go. And add the exterior glue. So you can see this doesn't have a taper down on either side. It's kind of just short and stubby. Okay, now we're going to change up glues a little bit. Alright, so this is the transparent universal medium. Okay, so I'm just going to take a little bit in my finger from the lid and go over this. Alright, so that worked out well too. So Powertex's Universal Medium as a glue. If you haven't seen my glue review, my favorite glues, I'll link it up above here for you. So I'm going to get the rest of these glued up. So yeah, but that gives you options. At least you can see a few of the options of glues that you could use to create these. Alright, these have had an opportunity to dry. And so we have a nice assortment of beads. I have an assortment of different things that we are going to do with these. So the first thing I want to do, some of them do take some time to dry as well, so we want to take that into consideration. I have made a new batch of Glass Bead Gel. If you haven't caught how to make your own glass bead gel, it is so much less expensive than purchasing it. I will link to that video right here. I'm going to work with it on the end of the skewer, and then I'm going to put them on here, my little drying system, to dry. So I'm just going to take the glass bead gel and add it to the bead. I'm not going to put it all the way around, but I am going to not be stingy with it. So this is made with gel medium, and the gel medium will dry clear, but it will take a bit to dry. You want to make sure you don't plug up your holes either. So I got a good amount of that on there, and then I'm going to just transfer it. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do, come in with some matte gel medium and some 3D small balls from Powertex. These are nice size. They're just similar to the Glass Bead Gel. They're tiny little marble shapes. I have some in a zip bag here. And then I'm going to take it and roll it into the small 3D balls, making sure I get them really in to those 3D balls, and then tap off any excess. Now this one is not going to be able to dry on the skewer because it's so thin. Okay, so that's the mini, or the small 3D balls. We'll let those dry. The next one, I'm going to use a similar product. It is 3D sand. Powertex is 3D sand. I am also going to pour this. This sand is super fine. It's really fun. So I'm going to do a couple of these. I did want to point out also that on these pink ones that I had done prior, there was this little lip of paper that's kind of sticking out. Can you see that? The white part down by my finger here. You can easily come in with a pair of scissors and just trim that up. That'll catch stuff and not be easy to thread. So I just trim those up whenever you find those. The ones that I made with you aren't as bad. There's a little one here. Alright, so for our next taking it up, I'm going to work with some of these longer ones. and add some of my favorite things, threads. So I have all this DMC floss that had been knotted and just kind of a hot mess. And I'm going to take some of this and I'm going to create some links. And I'm just going to leave them all kind of ratty, but I'm going to cut them into links that are my bead height friendly, so no longer than my bead height. And I'm just going to put them in a pile. We don't need a ton. Okay. Then I'm just going to kind of line them up a little bit. I'm not going to be too precise about this. I just want them about the length of my bead. And I'm going to apply gel medium all around the center of this wide bead. I want to be a little bit heavy-handed with the gel medium because I want these to stick well. And then I'm just going to take it and roll it and pick up those threads, and I'm going to have this fuzzy bead, and I think that will be really fun. I'm just pushing the threads into the glue to make sure that they stick. Now if these long lengths bother you, you can just come in and trim them. But I like to leave them fuzzy until I go to end up using them. And I typically use these as focal points. So, and the neat thing about this is you don't need a ton of threads to do it. This is a smaller bead, so our length is going to be smaller. So on this one, I'm going to go lengthwise with it. And this is kind of a metallic, it's a shiny thread. I've got a whole bunch of other stuff in there as well, but I'm really not going to worry about it. Now these I'm just going to strand out lengthwise. And so we're going to go around this bead this direction. So I'm going to again focus on the center with the glue, and then we're gonna pick these up by just rolling. And remember, anything that goes out beyond that you don't care for, we can trim up once it dries. But there we go. Now that one can dry. So I'm gonna leave that right there. All right, I'm gonna get the rest of these done up and we'll go from there. Once these are dry, we'll start adding some additional elements to this. All right, so these have all dried and I've kind of got them set. These are all our fuzzy ones with threads and fiber pieces. They turned out really fun. I am not going to trim these. I'm going to leave them as is and call those done. And then if I want to trim them up when I choose to use them, then I can do that. These are the beads that have the sand dust on them. And so we're going to add some color to these. I love how you can see some of the bead coming through the color of the paper. And then these are the ones that have the small 3D balls on it. We're going to add some color to these. And I did 4 with the gel bead, or the glass bead gel. And we're going to add some color to those. The first method that I'm going to use to add color to these is using a dry brushing method with the Powertex Easy Varnish and some of the powder pigments by Powertex as well. I have 2 Colortricx here, one in red pearl, so these are metallic. The Colortrixes are metallic in olive green. And then I have some coral pink Powercolor, which is not metallic. It's just a coral pink color. And this is really easy, and it's become one of my favorite methods to add color to texture. Okay, so I am going to put a little bit of the Easy Varnish into my glue pot. I was putting it in my lid, but it gets hard to open up because it gets coated. So I'm going to start off with the Powercolor, the coral pink, and I'm going to do this one, which is the one that has the small 3D balls on it. So I'm going to dip my brush into the Easy Varnish and load it, and it's a dry brush, and I've loaded it with the Easy Varnish. And I'm going to get a paper towel, and then I'm going to open my Powercolor. I like to loosen it up a little bit. And then I'm going to dip my brush into the Powercolor and pick up the pigment. And then I'm going to brush it off onto the paper towel so I don't have too much going to this at first. So then I'm going to, with a sideways motion, I'm going to just catch some of that color onto the top of those 3D balls. And apply that color. I'm going to turn my brush upside down and use the color that I have on the other side and do the same thing. If there's any loose balls, they will pop off. That's fine. For the most part, they should be well adhered. So then I'm going to come in and pick up some more pigment on both sides of my brush and go for a second coat. Pop that color a little bit more. I like to go from different directions and then clean that off and then decide whether or not I want more color on that, and I think that's good. So I'm going to add this to my drying stick, and I'm going to clean off my brush that has the pigment on it. I don't want to carry that pigment over, and get my brush back to dry. All right. So for this next one, I'm going to use the red pearl of the Colortricx, which is the metallic. It's a beautiful color, and I'm going to use it on this one that has the sand dust. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pick up my Easy Varnish, load my brush, and then dip into the pigment powder. It's going to pick up exactly what you need to have. Brush it out, and then come over. Again, that same motion. Now this is really fine, so it's not going to be, you're just going to catch the different texture of how it was added, the thickness that it was added. More than anything, it'll pretty much cover the area. I'm going to come a little bit down off the edges. Add a little color there as well. Just slightly. And that is metallic. You may not be able to tell it yet because it's still pretty wet, but we'll take a look at them once they're dry. Alright, and now I'm going to grab one of the Glass Bead Gel, and I'm going to use my final color, the Colortricx in the olive green. Make sure my brush is dry as much as possible. And I'm going to go over using that same motion and just catch the tops of those glass beads. You can see the metallic on this one a lot better. All right, that was dry brushing. So we could use Lindy's, which does have some metallic qualities to it, and spray using that. I'm gonna pull out one of these beads that we haven't added any texture to. And I'm going to add some color to this one. I'm using this Tibetan Poppy Teal. I'm not going to actually spray this. I'm going to use the nozzle and apply color. And I'm going to try to give this a light spritz to let it bleed out. Right, I'm going to let this dry. And we're going to do that same process on one that has the glass bead gel on it. This is Bougainville Fushia. It's a bright pink, and it is also metallic. But first I want to do some finger dry brushing on the tops of these beads on this. So I'm going to grab some white gesso, just get some on my finger, and I'm just going to basically do some dry brushing, just catching the tops of these glass beads. You don't want to have too much gesso on your finger when you're doing this, or it's going to go well beyond the tips of the glass bead. and then let that dry. Doesn't need to dry a lot, it won't take a lot. But while that's drying, I'm going to take this one that has the 3D balls on it, the small, and do the same thing. So here's how these look with the gesso on them. I've just caught the tips and have gesso on them. Now I think that this that liquid should soak into the areas that where the sand is. We're gonna see. I'm gonna add to this one. I'm going to add some of the Brusho acrylic shimmer spray. This is a gold shimmer spray. Get that mixed up really well. And once again, I'm going to just use the nozzle. And I'm going to, yep, it's soaking in. Add just some of the gold shimmer spray to this sand. Alright, so then we have the second one that has the 3D balls that I added the gesso to, and I wanted to try some of the Distress Stain, and I want to use a dark color. I'm not going to spray, I'm going to do exactly what I've done here and dab it, and I may need to use a little water to get it to move a little bit more. We'll see here. There we go. See how it's just wicking out when I add that water. That just wicks out, and you can see how the white that's on the tips of these just pops out. So this is the one that we added the gold shimmer spray. It's almost like it shimmers, but it's harder to see because it's attached itself to the little particles of the sand. It's hard to see in the camera. But all those little particles of gold mica have attached to the crystal almostness of the sand. It's really quite cool. Alright, then the other thing I wanted to try was using the stencil butter. I have this champagne gold. These come in a ton of different colors, but I felt the gold would look best on these. I have these two left. They're both Glass Bead Gel. And I'm going to put a little on this carrier page so I can dip my finger into it. And I'm going to hit the tops of those glass beads, just like I did with the gesso. That's just a nice little bit of metallic pop. Really plays off the texture. So I thought it would be really nice to use this one as well with the gold on it, since it's such a nice rainbow kind of color. Oh yeah, you can still, I love the fact that it dries translucent, so you can really see that color of the paper just coming through. So on this one, I'm gonna come back with some white and re-hit those from the Glass Bead Gel and have them pop a little bit more, since we covered them with. It is water soluble, so it may turn this gesso a light pink, but I think they will still pop. All right, so I thought we'd take a close-up look at each of these. These are our thread ones, of course, and our fiber pieces. DMC floss. These are threads, and then these are, it's some kind of string that I cut up into small bits. Those are fun. Now these two I didn't show you before, but I just took some of that stencil butter and a palette knife in the champagne gold, and on this one I just did little splotches. They've got a little texture because this is a paste, and it is super smooth and it holds its peaks, so it's got some nice dimension on it. And then one I just did a smooth coat just through the center. So there are those. And then we have those that we did that have the 3D balls on them. So we have these two that have the small 3D balls by Powertex. And this one has the pigment powder brushed onto it. This one has Distress Spray Stain saturated on it, and then I went over and dry brushed on top of the balls with the white. Well, I did the white first and then added the spray stain to it. And then we have the ones that had sand on them, and both of these were done with metallic. Now this one I dry brushed some metallic pigment onto, and it really saturated where the sand is. If you were able to get really close to it, which you really can't pick up, it really has a neat shimmer because of the sand. And then this one was a liquid Brusho's acrylic mist spray in a shimmer spray in gold, and it's just shimmering away, but the camera you could hardly tell. It just looks kind of yellow in the camera, which is neat because part of the bead does have yellow, but it's really shimmering beautifully from that sand dust. And then I did quite a few. I did 4 with the Glass Bead Gel. Whoops. And this one I used dry brushed pigment powder onto, and you can really see that pigment that was in the olive over the Glass Bead Gel. This one I just went over it with the stencil, the gold stencil butter. Gave it a really nice texture. This one I went over the glass beads with gesso, came in and added some Lindy's shimmer spray, just dripped onto it, which is hard to see it, but it is shimmery. And then I went over the glass beads with white gesso again, just to make them pop a little bit more. Lindy's is water soluble, so those glass bead where I put the gessos kind of turning light pink, which is fine. It still accentuates it. You can see the shimmer there a little bit. And then this, I just went over this with the stencil butter. And as usual, I will always have all the products listed down below. Now this one was one that I didn't do any texture to, but I did go over it with some Lindy spray in Tibetan poppy. And it just has a gorgeous, it went into the creases of the paper and is just shimmering away, which is hard to see on this camera. You can see a little bit there better. But that is how to make paper beads. At least this method of making paper beads. And I still have a lot left over. I haven't done much with, but I really love these rainbow ones. And these as well. So these could be spiced up a little bit, taken up the next level, or you can just leave it as is, and while you're in the middle of a project, if you want to add something to it so it goes with your project, you can do that. I like to keep them on hand. My stock of paper beads was getting low, and I thought this was an opportunity to try some different methods of just really taking these to the next level. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, if you would consider giving me a thumbs up, that really helps me and keep things moving across my art table. And thank you again for being here. I appreciate it.